In today's video, I'm going to show you 3 creative ways to use Mylar. Hey everybody, Lindsay Adler here. I'm always looking for creative in-camera techniques, something to experiment with, something to inspire me. And one of those tools is Mylar. But what is Mylar? Mylar is basically a plastic reflective sheet that in practicality, it's used for a lot of random things, everything from insulation to emergency heating blankets. But for us, we're not going to go with practical. We're going to go with solely creative. And another reason I like it is it's pretty budget friendly. You can get a 4-foot by 100-foot roll for about $45. Oh, and by the way, when you are buying them, be sure to get one that's a little bit thicker. This one's about the 6mm thickness. I find it to be a little bit more reflective, a little bit more specular, which you're going to see is very important for our upcoming setups. All right, so let's dive into it. Our first use of Mylar is going to be for a reflective surface or floor. Now, this can be really interesting regardless of your lighting and setup because it gives us this nice reflection of the subject. But in this instance, we're going to pair the floor with hard light. And what that does, Mylar plus hard light means interesting textures of light, interesting reflections. In fact, often when you have reflections off of Mylar, it looks almost like ripples of water, which is going to be why in this setup, we're going to choose cooler hues. It'll almost look like an underwater scene. And so we're going to begin with our main light. Off to the left-hand side here, we're going with a bare strobe, the hardest light we can get. So it creates a lot of reflections and the light is going to bounce everywhere. And then you'll notice on it is a saturated blue gel. So I'm going to begin with that light. Let's turn off the rim lights first. All right, so you can already tell with a single strobe how beautiful this effect is. There's a couple of things going on. We have the reflection of the subject on the ground, which is interesting. Then we have that beautiful texture and reflections of light that almost looks like ripples of water. Plus, since we added a blue gel, it feels like she's underwater. And that's why we chose that particular color. So it already looks good, but I think it would look a little bit more refined if there was something to pop the subject out from the background. So the next 2 lights I'm going to add have nothing to do with the Mylar effect, but instead the success of this particular image. So we're going to add 2 more strobes, one on each side of the subject to act as rim lights. We're using 1 by 4-foot strip softboxes with grids. Now the reason we're using grids is I don't want the light to spread everywhere because if it does, it'll wash out the blue color and it might kind of interact with the pretty reflections on the background and I want to make sure those stand out. So let's add our 2 rim lights. This again is the image straight out of camera and I think it's beautiful. But I have one creative in-camera technique with the Mylar. Let's add another. And that second in-camera technique is going to be adding a filter. I'm going to add a Tiffin 4-point star filter because we're using hard light to illuminate the subject and the Mylar. Any reflections that she has on her clothing are going to help create a starburst effect. And I love to add this technique whenever I have hard light and gemstones. All right, so let's see what it looks like with the star filter. You can see on the bodysuit and when we zoom in here that she has these big, beautiful starburst effect. Remember, if you were using a soft light on the subject, not only would you not see the stars, but you would also not see the reflections on the background. So for this to work, hard light is key. I have a lot of elements that I really like here. So now what I'm going to do is work with my subject to get the shot. And that will be our first use of Mylar on the floor as a reflective surface and to create texture on the background. For our second creative use of Mylar, it is going to act as our main light. It will be the reflective surface that illuminates the subject and the background. So what we've done is we've taken that roll of Mylar and we've hung it on a C-stand with a C-stand arm to the left-hand side of the frame. Now what we need to do is ricochet, bounce light off of it. And so our strobe is over to the right-hand side of the frame. Pointed back towards the Mylar. And basically what we're doing is we're lining it up kind of like pools so that it can reflect back onto the subject as well as the background. Now there's one other thing going on with our strobe. We also have a grid. And the reason we're using a grid is without any sort of modifier, the light spreads everywhere in the scene. It hits our subject, it bounces off the walls, and it gets rid of some of that pretty texture that we like. So by restricting the light, we're still getting hard light because it's a grid, but because it's a grid, we're concentrating it more. So let me show you what our main light is looking like. So that's perfect. So the Mylar is our modifier in this case. The strobe is bouncing off onto the subject, creating this beautiful texture. And by the way, I have found in these situations, adding a little bit of clarity and a little bit of contrast emphasizes that texture even more. Now, if I were just shooting with this single strobe, which you could absolutely do, I think it looks better as a black and white. Pop that contrast, something like that, I think can be really, really beautiful. So what that means is you can do this with a single strobe and a roll of Mylar. However, I wanted to show you how you could add a little bit more color into the scene as well. So I'm going to reset everything here. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a strobe that fills in all of the shadows. So kind of keeping with our aquatic theme, our second strobe is going to have a teal gel. It's right here. And you'll notice it's pointed back away from the scene. And the reason it's doing it is it's going to bounce off the ceiling, the walls, and it's going to fill in all of the shadows, kind of with this kiss of teal. But what's nice about it is because it's bouncing, it's going to be a very soft omnidirectional light. So let me show you what the second strobe is adding to the scene. All right, so basically what you can see is once we've added the teal, anywhere where it was kind of darker, a little bit more shadows on the first shot, now it has that beautiful kiss of color. And by the way, I'd probably color grade this a little bit. Maybe I'd increase the contrast and maybe desaturate her skin tones a little bit. So she goes very pale and those teals are what you're really paying attention to. So something like this. Now, for this instance, if I were still using a star filter, I wouldn't have any effect because she's not illuminated by hard light. There's a little bit of the hard light reflecting off the Mylar, but basically it's kind of diffused from different directions. The teal here is a soft light. So I'm not going to add a star filter in this scene because it won't make too much of a difference. This image is still giving us that nice texture of light, almost like it's a ripple of water. We could achieve this with one light. By adding a second, however, we can introduce more color to the scene. All right, let's get our shot. Our third creative way to use Mylar is as a background. You can do this in a variety of ways. In fact, in the past, I bought really inexpensive Mylar tablecloths, crinkled them up, added little clips to them, and added a really pretty textured background that I could bounce different colored lights off of. In this case, I'm taking that 6mm Mylar and hanging it behind her on two different C-stand arms. That's giving her a little bit of a V that she can fit within. Now, what that's going to do is create a reflective surface. Not only will it reflect our subject, but it will reflect the light, it will reflect color, it can create bright highlights, so it gives us a lot to work with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a setup that involves a creative filter, a creative in-camera technique, the Mylar. So let's break it down one by one. First and foremost, what I want to do is illuminate the subject with some hard light. And the reason that I want to do this is I purposely want to see some of those reflections. Our main light off to the right-hand side here has a 10-degree grid. So that's going to give us a spotlight on her face and torso. It'll also give us some pretty reflections on the background without overwhelming the scene. Let's take a look. So this is giving me a little bit of a futuristic look in this instance. And I'm seeing the reflections on the side of her. We have the Mylar crinkled just a little bit, which is giving it a little bit of a warped, surreal feel. What you could do is put Mylar over a V-flat and lay it down if you wanted to have really flat, crisp edges. Okay, so what next? What else could we do to this scene? Well, I already mentioned that I could add some color. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add a second light over here to the left-hand side, and we're gonna stick with those cool hues that we've been doing so far. We've played with blue and teal. We're gonna try blue again. And once again, it's going to be hard light because I wanna see those reflections. I wanna see the reflections off of her outfit as well as the Mylar. So a bare strobe left-hand side with a blue gel. So that's giving us a little bit more depth to the shot, a little bit more visual interest. And by the way, I'm seeing a lot of those reflections. And when I see reflections, I either think star filter or a black pro mist. A black pro mist, what it does is it takes those highlights, those reflections, and it makes them glow a little bit. Now, this isn't necessary to this scene, but I think it'll make it feel even more unusual, even more creative, maybe even a little bit more futuristic. So I'm going to use a 1 strength black pro mist. All right, so what you'll notice is without the black pro mist, there aren't really any bright reflections or glow on her outfit, and then the reflections on the background are relatively flat. But as soon as I add the black pro mist, they have a haze to them. Now it actually does haze the entire photograph. So typically when I use this filter, I add some clarity and I add back some contrast to the image. So now that I've added that back in, you just see everything has a little bit more glow to it. So far, the creativity we have in this scene is the Mylar space that she's in, our black pro mist for glow, and last but not least, we're going to do a technique called shutter drag. Now, in the description below, I have several videos that show you how I do shutter drag step by step. But fundamentally, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a continuous light. Then I'm going to use a slow shutter speed to allow that continuous light to show up in the exposure. And then lastly, I'm going to move my camera around. And what that'll do is it'll create streaks from the reflections on her clothing as well as the background. For this particular shot, we are using a 4-foot Nanlite pavo tube, so the Nanlite 30C. And I'm gonna make this maybe a teal. We'll go with the color palette we have been using so far. So we're gonna add our final light to the scene. And rather than shooting at my current shutter speed, which is 1/200th of a second, we're going to drag that shutter down all the way to 1/10th. That slow shutter speed is why we will be able to see the continuous light. When you look at this shot, there's a lot of cool color and movement, but it is way overexposed. Well, I use those slow shutter speed to make the teal continuous light show up, but that shouldn't overexpose the entire scene. And the secret is the modeling lights. The modeling lights of the other two strobes are continuous lights. So during that long exposure, they're registering as well, which is why the whole picture looks overexposed and blurry. So the last thing that I need to do before I shoot is turn off those modeling lights. Okay, so now the image is still relatively correctly exposed, but we have those streaks created by both her clothing reflections and the background. And we would not see those if we didn't have a continuous light and a slow shutter speed. So don't forget, I have some videos on how to do that and break it down more in depth in the description. All right, I've got a ton of interesting things to play around with. Her reflection, the reflections of the color in the Mylar. I have the reflections off the clothing. I have the streaks. So now it's the creative part of getting the shot, not only her posing, but my camera movement to create those beautiful streaking effects. Okay, here we go. So there you have it, 3 different creative ways to use Mylar. It's such a simple, inexpensive tool, but because it is reflective, it lets you do so many different things, whether it's laying it down as a floor, it's bouncing it off as a light source, or using as a background. So if you want to see the gear used to make all of these images, be sure to check the links in the description below, and of course, visit Adorama.com. And if you like the creativity that I'm playing around with here, I have so many videos just like this one. So be sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next one. See you next time, guys.